As you have seen and will see throughout this course, Reporting Services has many options that support all kinds of features for reports, with flexibility in how you use data and display it in the page. I'm going to assume that you have a good handle on what the report's users need in the report and how to retrieve the data from wherever it's coming from. After you know all that, one of the most important decisions you'll need to make is how to lay out the report to display data to make it as useful as possible to users. Your consideration here needs to include what forms the report is going to be rendered to, for display as HTML, a PDF, an Excel spreadsheet, or any of the other built-in options Reporting Services supports, as well as the devices on which users will view the report. In particular, if users are going to view the report on mobile devices, you'll need to consider how to make the report usable on small-scale devices. And if users are going to print the report, you'll need to consider how that affects the report layout. When thinking about user requirements for the report, consider how best to display the report's data. Would the data best be displayed in a table, a matrix, or a list? The nice thing about the fact that the tablix is the component between all three means that if you later decide that you made a poor initial decision about the form of the tablix to use, there are ways to convert one to the other, mostly by adding and removing row and column groups and making judicious use of the rectangle control with lists. But transforming the tablix this way means undoing some of your initial work and starting new on a new layout, although not to the extent of starting a new report from scratch. As you gain experience building reports, you'll no doubt find that your initial decisions about the right data region to use for different requirements and scenarios improves greatly. This is all part of the art of report design. Now, as I mentioned, Reporting Services has rich support for rendering a report in a variety of formats, for both online interactive viewing and the static display in a PDF or printed report, and a variety of other formats. A report rendered primarily as HTML is likely to have different layout requirements than a printed report or a PDF. One of the major ways that rendering has an effect on the report layout is pagination. And to have a complete understanding of the best layout options for a particular report, you'll need to understand how the differences among the rendering extensions affect pagination. Now, an in-depth discussion of this topic is well beyond the scope of this course, but there are a few things that you need to consider. The different kinds of rendering fall into three broad categories when considering pagination: page, soft page break, and hard page breaks. The data rendering formats include output to XML, CSV, or comma-separated values, and Atom data. These formats ignore report format entirely because the output is pretty much just the raw report data. As a result, these formats don't support page breaks. So if your users will only work with reports in these formats, don't worry about pagination at all. The soft page break formats include Excel spreadsheets, Word documents, and HTML. These formats are primarily for viewing reports online, using a web browser for HTML, and various Office or third-party applications for Excel and Word. For large reports in these formats, Reporting Services inserts page breaks in strategic locations when it makes sense based on the report layout. You can also insert page breaks where you want as part of the report layout design. And then the hard page break formats include PDF and TIFF image rendering, which use rigid page formats rather than a continuous report flow like the other formats. The primary use of these reports is for printing, and you either need to insert page breaks in logical locations as part of the report design, or live with the breaks that Reporting Services inserts for you where it must, as each page reaches its vertical limit. The bottom line here is that you need to plan ahead with the report layout design to handle the rendering format and pagination. If you need to, you can make a report adaptable to a variety of rendering formats. One way to do that is with the render format global variable, which has two properties, name and is interactive. You can use these properties in expressions to set various report formatting properties to handle various reporting formations. Again, essentially, you're checking the value of those properties and then doing something different within an expression in order to handle the different rendering format. And then there are other tricks that you can use as well. such as dynamically positioning text boxes and other report elements based on the rendering format and perhaps even report parameters. Reporting Services has all the tools you need to make reports adaptable, but some options may take a little bit of work on your part, and you certainly want to test them in the different rendering formats. When you develop a report that will be used by any of the hard page break renderers, you'll need to pay close attention to the various layout options and both report and page properties in order to make sure that the report works when it's rendered to a final report. This could involve making changes to the overall page structure and its properties, page headers and footers, and page breaks, as well as page numbering, and all of those can be affected by your decisions. A report has a number of properties that you can use to affect the page size, margins, and the report orientation, which is just portrait versus landscape. Collectively, all these properties affect how much data you can include within a report. In other words, how much is going to fit on the page. Besides the height and width properties, normally set to 11 inches and 8.5 inches for the paper size used in the US and some of the countries, there are more structural properties that can affect that content. You can also include multiple columns in the overall report, which can affect information density on the page. Okay, so here are some of the more common page structure elements that can affect report contents. So you have the overall report, you might have a page header and page footer, and then you might have multiple columns, or you could have a single column. And then here are the metrics that you can use and adjust using various properties, or at least a subset of them, in order to affect the size of everything, the overall page as well as the elements within it. All right, so the rendering extensions use the page height and width as a starting point. Then it subtracts the margin sizes in order to determine the usable space that's available for the content area. If the report includes page header and footers, those areas are reserved and the remaining area is what's usable for the body of the report. Now, page headers and footers appear on each page of the report, but you can restrict them to certain pages. Pages without the header or footer make those areas available to the body of the report. So it's not necessarily going to be consistent across all of the pages of a report. And then if the report has multiple columns, there may be spacing between the columns that further restricts the total area that's available for content. Now, as you'd expect, there are a number of properties that you can set that affect how much area there is for content in a report. So the page size is set by the report's height and width properties. The outer margins, basically the blue border that goes all the way around the outside, are set by the report's top, left, bottom, and right properties. And then the page header and footer each have a height property that determines how much space they occupy. And then the body of the report has height and width properties as well. Columns essentially break up the content area into multiple areas, which the renderer treats as additional pages of the report. As a result, it fills each column with content for as many columns that you configure on the page. So I'm just showing 2 here, but you can have 3 or 4 or whatever makes sense for the report. So you can think of a report with multiple columns as having multiple report pages on a single physical page. And you're likely to have spacing between the columns, which then further detracts from the total area on the page for that content. Now, an important thing to understand with columns is if the body size plus the margins exceeds the overall height and width of the page, again, normally 8.5 by 11 in the United States, the hard page break renderers are going to have problems rendering the page. The result is the report often looks fine when you preview it or view it online, but includes blank pages when you print it, since the bottom margin and perhaps some of the other content gets pushed to another page. In order to explore some of the page size properties, I'm going to use a simple report, Customer List. This report contains the name and phone number of each AdventureWorks customer. The report is built using a table tablix and displays 2 fields in 2 columns. Okay, fairly simple report, can preview it. And there's the data. And we can go from page to page and go to the last page, so you can see there's a total of 11 pages. Okay, now the preview that I just showed you uses the default HTML renderer, which is, as I mentioned, a soft page break renderer. Some of the page structure properties will only apply to hard page break renderers, such as the PDF or TIFF renderers, or when you print a report. Now, to get a preview of the report as it will appear in a PDF or the printed page, you can use the Print Layout view in the Preview tab. So I'm going to go over and preview the report once again as usual. As you can see, I get the same result. But now I'm going to use this toolbar button here called Print Layout in order to get a view of what it's going to look like using hard page breaks. So you can see it. Now you can go ahead and zoom in. We can do 100% there, or we can go back out actually a little bit more, and you can explore what the report is going to look like. And you can see that there's a total of 13 pages. So now you can see the margins. In fact, let me go back out to the whole page. So you can see the overall margins and how the report is going to look when it's printed, as well as the effect of various page structure layout property values. And keep in mind that the report currently takes 13 pages in its unchanged format. Now, one thing about Print Layout View, it retains its state for the duration of your Visual Studio session. So once you toggle this on, it's going to remain on whenever you preview a report until you toggle it back off. So don't be surprised when the next time you come over here to preview and it's still in the Print Layout View. Okay, so go back over to the designer here. And I'll open up the report properties because you can find a few of the page layout settings here within this dialog box. Okay, so we have portrait and landscape. As you can see, selecting landscape just swaps the properties of the width and height, and I'll move it back to its default. And then you can also set the margin widths. So I can scroll down or scroll back up, or I can type in values directly. But the thing is that these are just a few of the properties that you can use to structure the page exactly as you want. So don't get frustrated if you can't find some way of changing the report by using the Report Properties dialog box. In order to explore the full set of properties available, you'll need to come over here to the Properties window. And you want to make sure that you have the report selected here. So I already had the report selected, so that's what was already there, but you can also select this drop-down list and move between different elements. Okay, so I'm going to go back over to Categories here because I want to show you this Page section. Now it's important that you understand that over here in the Properties window, if you change any properties back in the Report Properties dialog box that I just showed you, all it's doing is changing the properties here within the Properties window. So this is the most important source for all of the page properties. Okay, so again, here's the page section. And you can see things like interactive size and margins and page size. So these are the three sections within this page section, page category, where you can set the overall page properties. Now, interactive renderers like HTML use the settings within interactive size, while hard page break renderers use the settings in page size here. And the dialog box actually changes both of these. Usually you want to keep the two sets of settings the same, but that's certainly not necessary. Very often with reports, if they're going to be displayed in a variety of ways, you're going to need to customize each of those so that the report displays optimally when users view it online, as opposed to generating a PDF. Let me talk about columns. By default, a new report has a single column on a page. These are content columns that I'm talking about here, not the field columns that you'll have within a tablet. So each of these are field columns within the tablets, but I'm now talking about content columns in the overall report. You can have as many columns as you'd like, so that the report renders content like the columns of a newspaper. Columns are controlled by the columns and column spacing properties that you can see here within this part, which is still within the page category. So there are the default settings, one column, and the column spacing is a 1/2 inch. Now, changing the column properties is a way to start to really get a feel for how the page properties work together. So I'm going to change this value here to 2 and hit enter. Notice that one thing that happens is that the design surface becomes wider. And so it shows the original column, which is the width of that tablet. It shows the spacing, which is that default 1/2 inch. And then it shows a space for column 2. Okay, so I'll preview the report, and we should have 2 nice columns, right? Take a second for it to regenerate. Notice I'm still in print layout view. But wait a second, that doesn't look very right. Let me zoom into 100% here. And all that really happened is we got separate columns. If we go to another page, separate column, page, and we're still on 13 pages. Okay, so this is all kind of weird. Shouldn't I have 2 real columns of content? Well, yes, you should. The problem is that the 2 columns and the 1/2 inch spacing are too wide for the page and the current margin settings. So I'm going to come back over here to Design View, and there's various ways to fix the problem. I could change the orientation, I could fiddle with the margins and so forth, and you'll need to do different things for different reports. But what I actually want to do here to solve the problem is come over here to Properties and go down here into Margins, and I want to change the left and the right margin to 1/4 inch. There's the left. And my mouse seems to be stuck, or the cursor seems to be stuck. There we go. There. Okay, so I've just narrowed those outside left and right margins. Haven't done anything with the column spacing or any other changes. And I'll go back over to Preview. And now you can see that we have what we expect. 2 nice columns of content. And as you can see, the spacing is a little bit off. This is pretty narrow. There's some extra space in there. There may be some extra space in there, although I think I made this text box width wide enough to display all the customer names. There's some fairly long ones. So you might be able to play with the overall spacing of these. So if you ever implement multiple content columns and get just weird results, it's probably because the space is exceeded the bounds of what it can display within the current page size. And then another thing to notice here is that the number of pages has reduced to 7 because we're showing basically twice as much content on each of the pages. And so you can scroll down from page to page to page and see on the 7th page that you have just a partial page of data.